We're so happy that he now is a resident of Tucson. Tonight, he's going to speak to us about what he calls bodacious butterflies. And anyone who was here in southeastern Arizona in the summer and fall of last year couldn't help but notice the unprecedented abundance of butterflies. And I will have to add caterpillars too. Fred will present a brief primer to us on butterfly biology, life cycle, host plants, and nectar plants, and also predators and avoidance of predators, including mimicry. Fred will also explain, and this is something I can't wait to hear about, how members of Tucson's Arizona Native Plant Society helped to solve the mystery of a grass and butterfly connection. So Fred, I'm turning this over to you, and we're just so happy to welcome you and anxious to hear what you have to share with us. Thank you.
Okay. So what I do, hit share screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There we go.
Okay, we're good.
Well, I think there's a way that you can make the picture larger and not be showing the other information from your computer.
Go down to the bottom, Fred, and choose the slideshow screen so that you.
So isn't that what it's got now?
No, we're still seeing your work view. Try it again. I thought I saw it was highlighted. Try clicking it again.
Okay, try clicking.
Clicking on the little projector screen icon.
Okay, I did.
Well, I see you're clicking on it. I see your, did you click or just touch? Yeah, try double clicking.
Okay, let me exit.
And let me just ask all of the people who are the participants, if you could please mute yourself so that you don't interrupt our speaker, that would be great. We'd appreciate it. Well, it doesn't seem to be changing, but it's really quite, it's pretty good the way it is. So if you want to just go ahead. Oh, there we are.
I'm not sure what I did, but
I don't know what you did either, but your computer finally decided to do it. So there you go.
okay.
Looks great.
This, oh, I see you're gonna.
Your cursor does work if you want to point things out with it.
Yeah, no, I know that. I'm just okay. So bodacious butterflies. I was looking for a title to describe all the wonderful butterflies that we did see last year. And the word bodacious came to mind. Since I had no idea what it really meant, I looked it up, and it says remarkable or noteworthy. And actually, what we had was more like fantastic, and remarkable and noteworthy to me seemed like an understatement. But since nobody knew what it meant anyway, and it sounds good with butterflies, that's the title. The photographs are either mine or my wife, Mary Klinkle. So this is some of the bodacious butterflies flying around. And I will actually talk about that part of it at the very end of the talk. And the first thing, even our local, well, ex, I guess, cartoonist, newspaper cartoonist, had to put something about the butterflies in there last fall. He recognized that it was so amazing. So kind of to start with, what is a butterfly? And obviously it's like, you recognize one when you see one, and here's the two-tailed swallowtail, which is the state butterfly, although they're found all over the West. And it's the largest butterfly that we have. So what is a butterfly? It's an animal, it's an arthropod, it's an insect, but it's in the order of Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera means scaled wings. And all those colors on there are made up of overlapping scales that are like shingles on a roof that make all the colors. And there's two types of scales. There's pigment colors, which if you took the scales and ground them all up, it'd still be the same color. And then there's the so-called structural colors. And like a male hummingbird's gorget, it depends upon how the light hits it. And so it gives you these really glowing colors in some cases. So here's a painted lady, which in some years can be really abundant in the desert, not for the last few years actually. And the orange color and the black color and maybe the whites, probably mostly, are just regular pigment colors. And then this little metal mark from South America, the blue and the red, they look like they stand out from the butterfly, and they're structural colors. The black may or may not be structural. It turns out recently that they realized that some of the butterflies that are really black have scales that are things that don't reflect light, and so they look extra black, and they've been using the structure of those to make things that are really dark. And then there's another metal mark from South America. And here, most of the background stuff is pigment colors, except the little green scales, which you can see almost the individual scale, are all little refraction gratings that make them kind of sparkle. Sometimes, though, butterflies have very few scales. And this pink-tipped satyr, one of my favorite butterflies, again in South America, where most of the butterfly doesn't have scales on its wings, except the very end of the hind wing where it's got the pink. And there's a whole slew of butterflies in South America that hang out in the rainforest that are called clear wings. And they maybe have some markings on the veins and stuff. And you'd be surprised in dappled sunlight at the bottom of the rainforest how they just disappear as they fly away. So again, back to what a butterfly is, it's in that order Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera includes butterflies and moths. And there's one kind of suborder of the Lepidoptera, which is the two super families of butterflies. And they're the true butterflies and then the skippers. And we'll talk briefly about those later. So one of the questions that people always ask me, one and two questions, and we'll get to the other one later, is what is the difference between a butterfly and a moth? So we kind of go through it. Well, the butterfly is day flying, and moth is night flying. Colors of butterfly are bright versus the dull color of moths. Moths have a fatter body. Their flight is different. The moths have a little hook that hooks the hind wing and the forewing together. And so they fly a little more choppy than most butterfly. They fold their wings differently, mostly, not all the time. But there is one consistent difference, at least in North America. There's some outliers in outside of this country. And here's a Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera that I saw and actually caught with a net. There were hundreds of these flying in the mountains above Los Angeles in the San Bernardino Mountains. And I was with a buddy, and we had this book, Butterflies of Southern California, had 10 color plates. And my friend went through it page at a time, slowly, and we could not find this butterfly in that book. And then I said, give me the book. And I looked at it. While I was looking at it, he said, Fred, wait a second. He said, look at the antenna. And if you notice the antenna, it kind of comes to a tapered point. And that tells you that it's not a butterfly, but in fact a moth. And this is a sheep moth, and it's a day flying, very colorful moth. Whereas a butterfly, and this is the Empress Lilia, which is a common butterfly here that as a host plant uses desert hackberry, so we see a lot of them. And if you notice, the tips of its antenna are almost look like little matchsticks, but they're clubbed. They're a little fatter on them, and butterflies all have a kind of a clubbed antenna. Sometimes though moths don't have just a tapered one. This one looks tapered from the side. This is a vein chanucha, which is a butterfly you see late summer and stuff, sometimes in the thousands. And you can see the antenna, instead of being just come to a point, are kind of like feathery. And the antenna for all butterflies and moths are a kind of a sense organ. So they can find flowers, or in the case of moths, because a lot of their mating and stuff is done at night, they find each other by sense. Butterflies by colors and stuff, because they fly in the daytime. And you're all familiar with the white-lined sphinx. We had a whole bunch of them, and that's common moth that a number of people I know at the Desert Museum the last few weeks have been stopping me and saying, what's this weird little hummingbird thing? And, very, very common butterfly. This is one of the foresters. I was taking a butterfly walk with people, and I couldn't convince them that this was a moth and not a butterfly. But again, you can see the tips of the wings taper. And this little guy is called a Snowberry clearwing. The snowberry refers to the plant, that its host plant that the caterpillars eat. It's clearwing because it's got very few scales on the wings, just on the veins. And it's a bee mimic. And so it's prevented. Now the clubs here are very weird looking. And then this thing, this beautiful thing, I still don't know quite what it is. It's a moth. I mean, it's not a butterfly, but it's kind of some kind of a wasp or bee mimic. It was found near Oaxaca. And then these guys look like swallowtails. There's several species of Uranus, and sometimes they defoliate an area, and then they'll fly out in the millions and make mass migration, again in Central and South America. But certainly looked like it could be a butterfly. Anyway, this is my old hat. It says, I don't do moths. So that's it. We're off moths for the rest of the. So because this is a native plant society, an important thing is the food plant versus the nectar plant. The food plant, or the host plant, is what the caterpillar eats. And the caterpillar is the eating and growing stage of a butterfly. For a lot of butterflies, the food plant is very specific. Monarchs and queens will eat milkweeds, only milkweeds in that family. An Empress Lilia uses a hackberry, but it only uses desert hackberry. There's two other hackberry butterflies that are found higher up locally that they use net-leaved hackberry, and only net-leaved hackberry. And then there's the snout, which uses hackberry, but it doesn't care what the species is, it eats them all, and that's why there's so many of them. And if you're looking for certain butterflies, it helps you find them, because if the food plant isn't around, then that butterfly it is not going to be there either. That's the wasting of time. Or if conversely, if you find a butterfly and you're not quite sure what it is, and maybe you see it oviposit or hang around a particular plant, might help you identify it. Where the nectar plants are basically the sugary substance that flowers put out in payment for pollinators taking the pollen and moving it from one plant to the other. And the adult butterflies get energy from that sugar water to be able to fly and find mates and so on and so forth. Like I say, most of the nectar comes from flowers. We'll see some other nectars or honeydews that don't. And butterflies might have some favorites. Baccharis is one when it's in bloom. Interestingly, Brittle Bush doesn't seem to be too interesting to butterflies. I very seldom see it on that, which is sometimes at this time of year, they're all over the place. No butterflies on them. So they're not specific. Butterflies are opportunistic as far as nectar goes. Whatever has, whatever's blooming at that time of year, and there's lots of it, boy, they're going for it. The butterfly families, they're broken into two super families. There's the true butterflies, which have 5 families here in Arizona. And then there's the skippers. The skippers have 4 families or subfamilies, depending upon how you do the spread. And and normally, if I was really going to go into depth, I'd show examples of each one, and I'd be able to show examples probably of the various families and going through this slide projector, but I didn't want to just do that, except for the skippers. The skippers are called skippers because of their flight, which is a kind of a bounding, skipping type thing for most of them. A lot of them are dark and brown and black and and they have wonderful names that just make you excited to see them, like mournful dusky wing and funereal dusky wing. And as you can tell by looking at them, they don't look very different, so it makes it a challenge. When people start out looking at butterflies, like with sparrows or gulls, if you live on the coast or something, I tell people to skip them. That's why they're skippers. And try and learn those later. Here, I guess, would be sparrows and stuff. Oh, one thing I want to point out, like sometimes when you're looking at birds and stuff, maybe you want to make sure you look at the bill so you get an idea of maybe what family it's in or what it eats. And the skippers all have this, well, not all of them, there's a few exceptions to that too, have this little kind of hook at the end of their club, little pointy hook. And so when you see something, and these would obviously be skippers to you, but and it's got a little hook on it, then you know you're getting close to the family. One of my favorites is this big guy. This is our biggest skipper. It's called a dull fire tip, and it's kind of really bright, stands out. Those white patches are actually see-through, translucent things. And when they get on like a pink flower or something, you see little pink dots. And I've had people tell me about the pink bird. And here they are. And this kind of talks again about nectar versus a host plant. The dull fire tip uses oaks as its host plant. It lays its eggs on oaks. Whereas getting nectar, in this case, it's an agave and something in the sunflower family. They're called dull fire tips because compared to the ones in the tropics, like this guy, which has actually got a fire tip, they are pretty dull, I suppose, but that's pretty nice. Anyway, and again, you can see those antennas got those little hooks on them. So the other question that people ask, besides how intelligent between a moth and a butterfly, is how long do they live? And when people ask me that question, they're really asking about adults. How long does an adult butterfly live? And I can clearly give an answer. It depends. Things like blues and little hair streaks and stuff like that might last not even a week as an adult. Their whole thing is to find each other, mate, and the female, of course, to lay the eggs. Monarchs, on the other hand, the ones that are flying in the summer, late spring, summer, might last a month or more. But the ones that emerge in Canada and northern United States in September or October will start heading towards Mexico or the coast of California, depending on where they are in the US. And then they'll kind of hang out where it's fairly cool so that their metabolism is low. And it won't be till February that they'll start to mate, and the females will go out maybe as late into March and start the next brood of the next group of monarchs, which will have several broods as they head north. And so those overwintering butterflies might live as adults for 6 months. But really, when you're talking about how long they live, it should be across the whole life cycle. And again, if you ask me, what does that mean? It depends. First of all, a lot of butterflies are multiple brooded, especially here where it's warm a good portion of the time. So that means they can have a brood, and then another generation comes and they can have a brood, and so on and so forth. And some of the butterflies that are really sometimes get common, like the snouts and stuff, they'll have multiple broods. Others only have one brood a year. Their flowers are out at a particular time, and I'll show you an example of that in a bit. So let's talk about the life cycle. The life cycle is typical of an insect that does complete metamorphosis. And some of the other orders, beetles do this. They have a larval stage, it's called a grub. let's see, yeah, Hymenoptera, ants and wasps and bees all do that. They have larvae and then go into a pupa stage and then emerge as an adult. And flies. And flies do the same thing. And their larval stage is called a maggot. But anyway, let's talk about the butterflies. So the egg is usually laid on, or if not on the plant, near the food plant by the female. She can taste it by putting her feet on the leaf and making sure that she's got the right taste. She can taste through her feet. The caterpillar emerges from the egg and starts eating and growing. And it's usually there's 4 or 5 molts for the average butterflies here in Arizona. And they're called instars. Each step, they get a little bigger, they outgrow their skin because they're eating like crazy, and they get a new set. And then, of course, the pupa is the stage where they're changing, where they're metamorphosizing into the adults. And for a butterfly, that's specifically called a chrysalis. It's called a pupa, and there must be a special name maybe for Hymenoptera, for beetles, but I don't know what it is. A lot of times people will talk about the cocoon. The cocoon is something that some moths make, and then they pupate inside of that. Like a silk moth is a good example. But not all moths make cocoons, and really butterflies do not at all. So that's the whole life cycle. They get a butterfly like this two-tailed swallowtail again, and you see it's nectaring on a thistle, which is in the sunflower family. But its host, one of the hosts here is along a riparian corridor, is the velvet ash. It lays a single egg on a leaf here, and maybe another one there on a tree, separates them out because the caterpillars have a big appetite. Put too many eggs close together and you got problems. And the eggs hatch, and these are second and third instars. That means they've molted once, twice. And you can see both of these instars still look like bird poop. They look really shiny. This one especially, you can see that, so that they look wet. And the idea, of course, there is that a bird is not going to want to eat bird poop, hopefully. When they finally get to this 5th instar, and this is where they're about to pupate, and these things look completely different. They got some of these fake eyes. They almost look like if you peer through a leaf at them, they may look like a snake or something that you don't want to mess with. They change color, and I'm not sure that's always what they do. And then they start on a walkabout because they want to make their pupa, they want to pupate somewhere away from their host plant. Maybe so birds and stuff can't find them. And they'll find a stick, put this girdle on, shimmy out of their skin, and then what you'll have left in this particular case for the swallowtails looks like a broken limb. It's kind of an interesting thing. Let me show you this on a black swallowtail, another swallowtail. And this is a pre-pupa. The thing's hooked up. So it's got this little pad that it makes out of silk with its hind end attaches to that. And then over here it has this girdle that holds it onto the thing, and it kind of leans back, and then it shimmies. It starts to shimmy out of its skin and just works its way down, and finally and then it dries out, and again it looks like a broken twig. This is an Empress Lilia on a butterfly count. I wanted to make sure it was counted. Actually, it was interested in the jelly in my peanut butter fly and jelly sandwich, and they do something a little different. They'll put a lot of eggs on a single leaf. And again, we've said this is desert hackberry. And this particular leaf had 28 eggs on it in one little patch. And then as they hatch, the caterpillars will eat the eggshells, their first meal, and then kind of spread out, pick up some of the green color. So they blend in real good with the leaves and slowly start munching on the leaves. The little black dots there is frass, which is droppings from the caterpillar. And then as they get bigger, they start to defoliate the thing, and you really got to make sure you have enough food for all of them. And they get the little antenna and stuff fake antenna just fun. So that's a different style. And then these guys, oh, and Empress Lilias and the Swallowtails can have several broods each year. This is an orange tip, the Sarah orange tip or Southwest orange tip as it's called now. And this is a butterfly you only see in late winter and early spring here. Its host plant are various annual mustards, so that come up in the spring. And in this particular case, this Sarah orange tip likes rock cress. And so they'll start turning up as the rock cress appears. This is a female Sarah orange tip, and it just had a little less orange on the tips of its wing. And this one is nectaring in a rock cress, the mustard, the rock cress, and it's also will lay eggs on the stems of these flower things. So this does both this nectar and a host plant is the same. But these only do this once a year. They'll lay the eggs. The eggs for the sulfurs and the whites are kind of spindle shaped, so they really stand out. And then the caterpillar, when it hatches, will go up, maybe eat some flower buds. And then when it kind of finishes off those, will start to eat some leaves. And then when it finally gets to pupate, it pupates down in the leaf litter, and there it stays for at least a year. And then if the conditions are right, the next year it'll emerge. We're not really sure if they can go, how many years, multiple years they can go. They may go more than 2 or 3. This is a desert orange tip, which is closely related, and it lives in kind of drier areas. In Sabino, it likes Streptanthus as a host plant, and it also does 1 brood a year in the spring and whatnot. And I have a friend who raises butterflies in Utah, and he's got a kind of an outdoor patio that's covered in fine mesh nets, so that parasites can't get his butterflies. He had a brood of these desert orange tips through some dry years. Of course, everything's been dry in the Southwest for the last 20 years. And he had some of the butterflies, some of the desert orange tips didn't emerge from the pupa for 9 years. Now we're used to seeds of plants, like especially in the desert where they'll be scattered and you'll have a lot of, and you won't see that flower for years and years, 10, 20 years in some cases. And then all of a sudden you'll have a wonderful rain event, and all of a sudden the desert will be alive with flowers that you hadn't seen since you were a little kid. We didn't realize that the butterflies could do that, but that makes sense, because if a desert orange tip emerged in the spring and just stayed in the pupa for a year, and there were no host plants because it was dry as it could have been, like last spring in 2020, then there's no host plants, and you're not sending your genes along to the next generation because there's nothing for the caterpillars to feed on. So they've adapted. Predators are important for the story of bodacious butterflies, and I'll explain that at the very end of the talk. But there are predators on eggs, on the caterpillars, on pupae, on adults, spiders, wasps, mantids, flies, mammals, birds, anything you can think of eats things of various things. And then you also have parasitoids. That's maybe little wasps or little flies that don't eat the caterpillar or the adult. They lay their eggs on it. And then those larvae penetrate the caterpillar or the eggs or the pupae and go inside and eat the developing caterpillar or whatever, and then actually pupate inside the egg or the caterpillar or the pupa or the adult and emerge as adults themselves later on. So there's a ton of things that the butterflies have to go through, a bunch of predators. Of course, so the butterflies, this kind of war, they've come up with a bunch of avoidance strategies to keep them from being consumed by the predators. And we'll look at some of those. first we look at some of the predators, and I know this Jillian is for her. The golden orb web spider is cool. Link spider, which is really a cool thing to play with, as Jillian has done. And then we have a lot of crab spiders, and these crab spiders that kind of look like a crab, and apparently this one is on a white flower, and it may have been white to kick off, but a lot of them will get on a particular flower, and then after a few days it'll change. And I think the last time I heard Jillian give a talk, I don't think they were quite sure how or why. Or we know why, because then they can hide, but how it changed to meet the color of the flower. Like this one is almost impossible to find. This is the abdomen of that. And there's the thing. And so a butterfly lands there, or any insect, and whoop, it gets grabbed. And here's a Serranus blue that's been grabbed by a yellow or yellow crab spider. This is a spider. You can see his abdomen here really big. It's got himself a snout, or herself. And other things are praying mantis. This particular mantis has found a moth. And praying mantis is interesting to me because this is a praying mantis, this brown one with a queen. And then there's another one with a pipevine swallowtail. And both of these butterflies are butterflies that consume plants that have toxins in them and make them unpalatable to birds, as we'll see in a bit. But that doesn't seem to deter the mantis. I guess it doesn't have good taste. One of my favorite group of predators, because they're so evil looking, are robber flies. And this is a robber fly that's got another fly, smaller fly in its grip. And what they have is an all-shaped mouth that they can puncture the thorax of whatever they're grabbing, and then suck the juices out of it. And that all is sharp enough, and they put enough pressure that if you get a decent sized robber fly and hold it, you're liable to get a puncture wound from them. They're pretty, like I say, they're evil looking. And some of them are really cool looking. This thing off the top looks like a Tarantula Hawk. But first thing you might notice is got really short antenna. And a Tarantula Hawk with longer antenna. It looks funny. This was found, and we see them every summer up on Mount Lemon. And they hang around the ceanothus bushes, and they're sitting there waiting for a butterfly to come in there. And in case you don't remember what a Tarantula Hawk looks like, you know the story of those. But here's these long antennae, and they paralyze the tarantula. They don't kill it. They bring it back to the tarantula's hole or its hole, lay a single egg on it, and then the larvae of the wasp works its way into the tarantula, eating it, growing, having several instars, and just before it's about to pupate, its last meal is the vital organs, which finally kills the spider. Kids love that story. It's just great. But here's the robber fly, and it's got a butterfly that's a Naeus metal mark that likes to go on ceanothus bushes because that's its host plant. And of course, we have dragonflies, and we have wasps. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of parasitoid wasps, which are really tiny, but the paper wasp is a real lover of caterpillars. And what they'll do is in their little paper nest with the little chambers, they'll go out and hunt down caterpillars, moths, butterflies, doesn't matter, and stuff them into the chamber if they can stuff the whole thing in there, lay a single egg on that, and then close the chamber up, and then the larvae will eat that caterpillar that it brought in. If the caterpillar is a bigger caterpillar, what sometimes I see the wasp do is it stings the caterpillar, kind of immobilizes it. It'll chew part of it and take a piece that's just big enough to fit in that chamber, stick it in the chamber, lay an egg, close it, then come back and get another piece of that caterpillar. This wasp I saw one day with an orange sulfur caterpillar just walking along, probably going to take it back to some hole and lay an egg or two on it for its young. So wasps are a big problem for caterpillars especially. And we've got lizards like this ornate tree lizard. The butterflies have crypsis and various tricks, which we'll go through here. This is a morning cloak in kind of a sad name for it, but I guess because it's brown and dark. In Europe, they call it a Camberwell beauty, which I like the name better. But this one, if it flushes and lands on the bark of a tree, it just disappears. I mean, it really looks like tree bark. And a lot of times I wondered if I actually really saw the butterfly when it lays up against the bark. The snout is another one that on top, the top of a lot of butterflies, the dorsal side, are where they have the colors, where they show off in mating and stuff like that, and recognition of each other. But the underside, usually the tricky side. And so this snout, when he's closed, looks like this, and this is the underside. And there's his snout. He's called a snout because he's got these two palps, which are also sense organs like the antenna are. It helps him find hackberry trees wherever. But rather, he looks like a leaf, and sometimes he'll put his palps down, and they'll almost look like the petiole of a leaf. And we have a butterfly. It's not uncommon here in southern Arizona. It's called a tropical leafwing. And on top, again, the bright colors of the orange and stuff. And underneath, it's got this dull thing, and boy, it really looks like a leaf when it's in there. And again, sometimes when I've seen one fly over and I know where it is, and I point it out to somebody, they say, "Where is it with regard to that leaf?" In the tropics, there are some really cool ones. This is one of my favorite. And it's bright orange underneath as well, but it's got little things. It's like mold and cuts in the leaf and everything. And none of them are exactly the same. The idea is if they all looked exactly the same and had the same spots, after a while a bird would say, there's something suspicious about these leaves. So that's crypsis. Then the buckeye does almost an entirely different thing. This is top surface. When he's closed, he's kind of a dull brown and so on and so forth. And if he's approached by a predator, just before he flies away, opens his wings, and all of a sudden the predator has got things looking at him that look bigger than it is, and the butterfly gets a few seconds to make an escape. Another butterfly that's found in the tropics are these owl butterflies. And when they're hanging in a tree, they almost remind you of an owl. And it's so interesting to me that even in this, it looks almost like the reflection of light in here, but it's part of the color, part of the scales of this bug. So that the making itself look like an eye of an owl is really, really done well. Another thing is this so-called back to front mimicry, which this is the gray hair streak, a pretty common bug. Usually you don't see them open. I'll show you in a second, but this is the head down here, but it's got these two black spots that are almost like eye spots, and they're accented by these orange spots. So your eye is pulled to them. And then you got these little things, these little thread-like things out there, which are why they're called hair streaks. And so they kind of look like antenna, and this looks like eyes. So the back looks like the front. And normally what you see them is like this. They're sitting in a flower. They kind of get their head down. And then this part is up in the air. Again, the eye spot. They actually move their hind wings back and forth so that it kind of makes the false antenna move. And for a long time, everybody kind of felt like they did this so that they would, if a bird grabbed them, they'd grab them back there instead of in the vital parts around the head and stuff. And part of the wing would break off, and then they could fly away and live to mate or lay eggs another day. And over the years, I've taken a few pictures of gray hair streaks where they've been, you can see an actual bite or tear out of it. These look like they were both done by something big like a bird. But recent studies, and I don't know, again, Jillian and I have talked about this. There was a paper not too long ago that said that the hair streaks evolved to escape from these jumping spiders. And, I don't know I didn't read the paper. I mean, I just read a synopsis of it, but that's an interesting thought. But the same idea holds. It is a way that they escape predation from whatever. I show this picture, great purple hair streak, to lead into another one. This is another one that has a lot of stuff going on back here. And so it looks like it might be antenna, and there's some bright colors here, maybe look like eyes. Meanwhile, the eyes down there. But the other thing about this butterfly is, and the great purple hair streak, which is nectaring on what is it, Brittle Bush probably, its host plant is mistletoe, especially desert mistletoe down here, but it uses the other mistletoes up higher. And this one, beside doing that back to front mimicry, also has all those red spots and orange underneath and black and iridescent blue. So it probably is distasteful, and when its caterpillars eating the mistletoe, it probably gets some chemicals that don't taste good. So I can segue to my distasteful butterflies and mimicry. It's a fascinating subject. So here's two pipeline swallowtails, the females on the right. You can see they have big orange dots on a mainly black with some iridescent blue, which is again structural colors. But it really stands out, and they eat pipevines, which the name implies. Pipevines have toxins in them. The native people use them to kill parasites, internal parasites. So that's probably not a great thing. But the caterpillars can sequester them without that and pass them along as adults. And a butterfly will eat one and say, "Oh, that was terrible," spit it out almost immediately. And the butterfly's probably dead. But it says to itself, "I am not eating anything that's orange and black." And so future pipevines don't get eaten. And there's the caterpillar of them. And I think Jack was talking about how some of them are black with just a little bit of orange sticking out on these little false cuticles. They're not sharp or anything. They don't really seem to serve any purpose. But they're orange and black. And so again, the warning colors, "Don't eat me because I'm distasteful. This is a pipeline swallowtail." And I'm thinking and looking at that, why are all those things, those false antennas sticking out? Maybe because they resemble the giant centipede. Just a thought, but it might keep another predator away that from eating them. And this is a butterfly called red-spotted purple. And on the top, and this is the top view, it kind of resembles the pipevine swallowtail with some blue iridescence in the wings, but it doesn't have the swallowtails that a pipevine swallowtail does. That doesn't have those more rounded. But underneath, it has a bunch of orange dots and some blue iridescence. So there's a resemblance to the pipevine swallowtail. And birds will avoid this, even though this lays its eggs on willows. Willows have salicylic acid, which is the stuff that makes aspirins taste bitter, but it's probably not the toxic taste that the pipevine plant has. And so it gets protection because a bird has eaten one of these once in its lifetime. And again, the monarchs, we have a monarch butterfly here and the queen here. We have more queens than monarchs. We get some. And then there's the Viceroy. The Viceroy is very closely related to the red-spotted purple I just showed you. And again, it's a mimic of these butterflies. And it also eats willows. Oh, just to talk about the orange and black color. This is a milkweed bug. Milkweed bugs and their aphids are orange or orange and black like these adults are. And again, it emphasizes that orange and black color. And so that birds, even if they're slow learners like me, they learn to stay away from orange and black. Here's a queen and a Viceroy here locally. And the Viceroys back in like where it came from in New York and stuff, looked much brighter orange, like a monarch does on top. But here, they're kind of that dull orange that the queen is. And they also have this line of spots, which you don't see on the ones back east, so that it closely, it looks more close to this queen, the milkweed butterfly, than a monarch, because there's more queens here. It gives protection. And I think, oh, this is an interesting one. These are Chiricahua whites. They're sometimes called Mexican pine whites. Their host plants are pines. The caterpillars eat the needles of the, and this is the female, and they fly. Their biggest flight, they have a flight sometimes in June or July, but their biggest flight is like in October. And it's about the time, and they're up in the mountains where the pines are, obviously. They're flying about the time that monarchs are flying south through the mountains. And so this is a mimic. I mean, I'm sure the pine, the chemicals in pines that the caterpillar ate probably make it distasteful, but not like the monarchs from the milkweed. Anyway, these look very much like milkweeds, and they're not real common, so that the monarchs that are passing through in large numbers sometimes in the mountains, this mimicry works for them. And you say, well, that's great. How come the male doesn't get that same opportunity? How come he's white? I mean, how come he isn't orange? Well, first of all, if you have too many things that are orange and black, and some of them are perfectly fine to eat, then after a while, birds may say, well, that one wasn't good, but maybe this one will be better, and we'll eat them. That's why you don't want to have a lot of mimics when you have, and you want the models to be the thing, so that most times a bird eats it, it's not good. And frankly, the males are a little more expendable. I mean, all they provide is sperm, whereas the female is the one that's got to lay all the eggs and so on and so forth. So the color just went to protect the females. Interesting. And this is a Gulf Fritillary. They eat on passion vine. We do have some native passion vines here, as you all know, but there's a lot more of them here because people have planted some of the pipe vines that grow in the southeast. And it's called a Gulf Fritillary because it's very common around the Gulf states. It's also got the orange and black passion vines, have lots of toxins in them. So the same thing holds. Again, it's staying to this orange and black, and the butterflies learn not to do it. This is an interesting page. There's a series of books of Butterflies of the World by Debrera. And this has got this is a book on the neotropical, in other words, in the neotropics. He's got them for Africa as well. And it's on the metal marks, and he's showing the mimics we saw before were all what they call Batesian mimicry. In other words, you got a distasteful or poisonous creature, and then you got a mimic that not necessarily poisonous, but gets protected because this predator won't eat it, thinking it's poisonous. Especially in South America, you have a whole suite of butterflies, and maybe you'll be in a particular valley, and a species that's yellow and black in one place might be orange and black with all these butterflies, and they form a swarm of butterflies. Some are mimics, some are models. Obviously, you want more distasteful models. And although this was a book on metal marks, he had these 5 metal marks that are circled. Those were, they had that color pattern. And then the next family, the tiger wings, which are related to the long-winged butterfly, I think they're also toxic. I don't know about the metal marks. The long wings, which the Gulf Fritillary is one, they eat passion vines, and so they're distasteful. The Pierids, these guys, those are the whites or sulfurs, and none of those here in this country are really distasteful, but they've got these weird colors that normal Pierids don't have, but again fit in with everything else. And then you have the monarchs. This is a monarch, and this actually eats milkweed, but again it fits in with everybody else, so it looks like the rest of them. And then this one big one is the swallowtail, most swallowtails, except for the pipevine, don't necessarily eat toxic or distasteful food. So I don't know whether that's a mimic or the model. And then the rest of the butterflies here, no, the rest of the Lepidoptera here are all moths. And again, I know nothing about which ones are the toxic ones, or, you know, but they all go in this big, and if you're mimicking something and you're both poisonous, it's called Muellerin mimicry, in that you're just, again, accentuating the fact that this color is not something as a bird you'd want to eat. And a couple of just little side things. Some butterflies get help from other creatures, and I always think that's interesting, those connections of things. These are three of our common little blue things. They're blue on top. These are the undersides. They look kind of similar to people when they fly. The marine blue is probably our most common one, and it has these wavy lines all through it. And I always say, remember, it's called a marine blue, and it's got little wavies on it. So if you can remember waves in the ocean and you tie it up. The reason it's called a marine blue is not that it hangs around the ocean, obviously not here in Arizona, but it's kind of a purpley blue color, not the bright blue that these two are. And all three of these butterflies eat various plants in the legume family, the peas. And this is a Raykert's blue, the one we saw there. And the Raykert's blue is eaten Dahlia pringli, very common plant in Sabino. And you see this big ant, looks like, oh, this is a problem for that Raykert's blue, right? He's going to be getting it. Nope. And then if you look at this ant, he's kind of just, he's walking around, and you notice his whole abdomen here is see-through, and it's got like liquid in it. What the heck is going on there? And here's a picture of him up on top. He's got some pretty hefty looking jaws. I mean, you know, you'd worry. But if you look closely, there's a little dot of honeydew. And the blues all have, and some of the hair streaks, their caterpillars put out honeydew in a gland, which they feed to ants as protection money. And just like, and the ants are like the little mafia, and they protect this thing from being preyed upon by wasps and bees, and well, not bees, the bees are vegans. And so there's a lot of ant tended ones. And if you're in a place when the ants have been wiped out, or like in California, we get a lot of the ants that are there all over the place. They're not coming to me. And they chase out the native ants. The butterflies don't do well because they don't have the protection. Another example of different species taking care of each other. This wasp is the paper wasp, which again, and he's chewing at the bottom of this Tacoma stand. These have these big flower parts. This one's fallen off there, and he's able to get at some of the sugary stuff. But you can see these cuts clearly in the base of these leaves. And that's, I mean, the flowers, and that's done by the carpenter bee. The carpenter bee, he can't get in there. He's too fat to get in down to where the nectar is, way down in there. And he's got these tools to be able to drill holes in wood. Well, heck, you know, making a little slit in a flower is no big deal. And you can see there's some over here. The reason this picture isn't the clearest, but I took it because way over here, and I hope it's not covered up, is a Leda mini streak, a very small hair streak. And it's coming to these holes that the carpenter bee has made because it can't get into the flower, or its proboscis isn't long enough to reach the nectar. And so it also becomes a nectar thief. You're getting nectar, which is normally payment for delivering pollen, without going by the stamens or the pistils, for that matter. Okay, so we're down to the last two things, the grass mystery and then the bodacious butterfly part. So the grass mystery is this. Ever since I've been here, every time I go up Madeira road to Madeira, what is that, White Horse Road, I guess is what it's called, out in the grasslands, you'll see patches of grass and this tanglehead. I'm trying to think, Heteropogon contortus. And you'll see butterflies on it, sometimes hundreds of butterflies in a small patch, and then you'll go a quarter mile and there won't be any more. You know, and you find a quarter mile up, there'll be another patch of butterflies. And why are they there? And the two that really stand out a lot are in the late summer and early fall are the snouts and the queens. And you can see in both cases, they've got their proboscis out and they're getting something. So I don't know, a few years ago, I just couldn't stand it and went out and checked, and I could feel that there was a sticky substance. And I thought, well, maybe it's some sugar that the grass is putting out. And I actually tasted it, which, like I say, in retrospect, and we'll find out why I should not have done. Luckily, it didn't do me any harm. It wasn't enough, but I didn't taste anything sweet. But whatever it was attracting these butterflies. And and the Empress Lilia, which doesn't nectar much, again was imbibing in this stuff. And we find that. And at the Desert Museum a couple of years back, there was a nice female, a great purple hair streak on the tanglehead that's there. Again, proboscis out, getting whatever she was getting from there, the honeydew. And when you look closely, you can see these little beads of sticky stuff on the tanglehead. And so my mind's going, well, what's going on here? And one thing I thought of, okay, well, maybe, you know, the grass, some grasses hedge their bet. I mean, they're wind pollinated, we know that, but maybe this one is how the evolution came to flowers with giving out nectar and stuff. You know, sometimes the grass, maybe when the wind isn't blowing much or something, it puts out some nectar stuff so that the insects will carry its pollen from one plant to another. But one of the things that bothered me was, again, this patchiness. There'd be a group of them. Why aren't all of them doing that? Why are they just in this, you know, one spot and then there's nothing? I mean, even though there's tanglehead all the way up and down the road, you know, okay. So that, and everything I've looked at and, you know, online, and could not find anything that says that grasses do anything but wind pollinate. Okay. So that kind of hypothesis was going by. And then one thing I noticed a lot of times beside these butterflies that were there, there's a thing called extra floral nectary that I learned about. And velvet mesquite has it at the base of each leaflet here. At the base of each leaflet, there's a little shiny drop. If I'd blown it up and show it to you better, but and this is a new leaf on a velvet mesquite, a fresh one, and that's again sap, it's sweet sap, and when I found out what the reason for that was, the mesquite put that out to attract ants. The ants like the honeydew, but they also then eat any caterpillars or anything else they find and protect the velvet mesquite. So I thought, well, maybe that's what this grass was doing. It was putting out something to attract wasps, and you'd always see paper wasps on tanglehead, I mean, beside everything else. And thinking, okay, so they're coming there, they're getting this honeydew and from the grass, and sure enough, you know, when the wasp lands there and finds a caterpillar, it says, oh, hey, I'll bring this back to my nest. And again, this patchiness of these insects all in one place bothered me, but I was still throwing that out. And luckily, I got John involved. At one point, we were talking back and forth, or maybe emailing back and forth. I think Rich Balowitz, the guy that wrote the butterfly book with Jim Brock, was wondering why these things are nectaring on there. And John, I guess, actually, I think he took some plants back and under a microscope, and he and maybe George Ferguson, maybe I'm getting people mixed up, but looked and they could see, the sticky stuff on there. They could see stuff floating in there. Maybe it looked like pollen, and thinking, yeah, maybe that's what they were doing. But again, it didn't make sense to any of us. And Sue Carnahan, luckily, was in on this email, and she said, wait a second, guys. And she went and looked, and she found that there's something that makes this honeydew, and we'll see what that is in a second. After and we discovered that, and I agree with Sue, and I think everybody else has now that has heard this explanation. Back in December of this year, that was in September of last year. Back in December, somebody let me know that there was a soldier butterfly. This is a butterfly that's a milkweed butterfly, and looks very much like a queen, and it milkweed. And they're, I'd say, pretty rare. And some years you have a few of them in Southeast Arizona. And this year there hasn't been one for a while. And there was one down near Tumacacari, near San Gratuitous Lane, where it hits the river. And there was a bunch of grass there. And there were all these butterflies, including this soldier, which I was lucky enough to see. On a queen, these white dots come all the way down here. They don't want to jump the gun there. Anyway, and there were a lot of other butterflies on the metal marks and a painted lady, and you could see the painted lady was scarfing up something from the grass. I didn't recognize the grass, and then I guess it was Rice had checked with Mike Bauer, who I guess is a grass expert, and Mike was thinking it was a paspalum. And maybe dilatatum, what the grass was, because I'd taken some of the grass and took pictures of it in every which way, and there was something about the way the seeds were and stuff. But again, if you take a close-up of the thing, you see all this sticky stuff all over there that were attracting the butterflies. So anyway, like I say, I really, Sue Carnahan was the one, in my opinion, who gave us the leads. She found a few articles. Turns out grass does not attract pollinators. It's wind pollinated, so forget that. Grass does not attract predators by itself. There's no reason to. Grass does not make any honeydew at all. So where does this come from? It comes from an ergot, which is a kind of fungus, probably mostly in the genus Claviceps, I don't know, Claviceps, which does make honeydew. Why does this fungus make the honeydew? Because it attracts insects that get the spores stuck to it, and then they can carry it onto another plant. This is why the grasses are, and where these butterflies are so patchy, because all the butterflies, I mean, all the fungus is spreading in one place, and it hasn't made it all on all the grasses. Of course, this fungus, these ergots, which I never even heard of until Sue found this thing, are of great interest to ranchers because if too much grass gets that and too many cows do it, they can make them sick, as there's toxins in that fungus. And that's why my licking the honeydew was probably not a great idea in retrospect. And also the grain industry. I mean, once they get on there, they completely destroy the seeds, the fungus. And so it makes it inedible and kills the seeds. So there's a lot of money in studies that have gone to people for figuring out, how to deal with this fungus. And George Ferguson sent me an article that was written by, or one of the co-authors is Elizabeth Arnold, Dr. Elizabeth Arnold, who's at the U of A, that she wrote with two other authors in 2008, which talks about a moth that is a vector for these fungus. And not only does it bring the fungus over, which is interesting, it also brings over the mycoparasitic fungus, which attacks the ergot fungus. So, it's just kind of all this stuff is interrelated. Very cool. Anyway, so it's old news for a lot of people, but it wasn't for us butterflies. Okay, finally, our last step here, the bodacious butterflies. Why were they so bodacious? Why were they everywhere last year? Okay, so it's the tale of two different rains. One is none. From March of 220, the spigot got shut off. It became hot and dry. Our monsoon of 2020 was the second driest. I think the year now of 220 as a whole was the driest ever. And the plant life, especially when you got to May and stuff, was completely parched. One of the things I used to point out to people, this place is looking like a desert. I mean, there was no green at all. If you can remember back to May, you probably want to blank a lot of that out. No plants, no herbivores, no butterflies, nothing. But then, starting in July of last year, we get this monsoon that went from the second driest to the third wettest of all time. It was hot, but not dry. And all of a sudden, the plants started to respond by the end of July. You started seeing plants come up. You started to see flowers starting and leaves coming on the trees. And by late August, the butterflies responded in a big way, and only certain butterflies. I'll talk about that in a second. So this wonderful rain got all those butterflies there. But that's only half the story, and we'll see that. So just to look at some butterfly counts from last year, we do one in Sabino Canyon right around the 1st of April or the last of March. And last year, the Sabino count, and it's not just Sabino, it goes all the way up as far as we can go into Mount Lemmon. And, like this year, it wasn't much up high because we had snow, and so we didn't have a lot of plant. But last year we had, when it was the end of that super dry period, and it's still dry, we had only 28 species. This is a count that averages about 60 species, maybe a little more. And it only had 28, less than half that it normally had. And numbers of individuals was, in the dirt, there was nothing. There was one of this and 3 of that. And I do Sabino itself on this count. And I normally get close to 30 species of butterflies in the spring. I had 9 in 2021, last year. Then the rest of the counts are after the monsoon rain started, but a lot of them are early. There's a Sabino Canyon summer count, which we did on August 26th, and it had 44 species. Again, not many individuals, and 44 species, like I said, the average is usually 60. And then the Santa Rita Mountains summer count was done at the very end of July. And again, it had 44 species, which was below its average. Again, not many individuals. Then the Ramsey Canyon count, which normally gets, I'd say, probably averages around 80 species in early August, had 67 species. It was species-wise, it wasn't bad, but there were a lot of butterflies that just were gone. I mean, things that we'd not missed in whatever the 27 or 8 years that count had been done, had never missed before in the count, and they weren't there. Or we find one of something that, we usually get 50 of. And then the Patagonia count, which Rich Balowitz is the compiler of, was done a little later in August. And now the plants were starting to respond, but the species numbers were lousy. There were 56 species. Patagonia is almost every year has the highest count in the country for butterfly count. Usually, it's in the high 80s, 90. It's gotten to 102, I think, one year, and this was just completely depressing to all of us. The interesting thing was there were a lot of butterflies, but 83% of the butterflies we found were in just 7 species. snouts, cloudless sulfurs, these individuals that responded to the rain, could respond quickly, do multiple broods, and were able over the month or so that there had been rain to be able to pump out lots and lots and snouts for sure.
Oh, Fred,
Yes.
excuse me, but we do want to have some time for people to ask questions at the end, and I'm sure that there will be some questions.
Yeah, this is 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so the Santa Rita Mountains count, which is done in October, the fall count, which is done on October 7th, it's 79 species. I think the highest we ever had was 81, so it was pretty good. But again, the number of individuals, 96% of them were just 6 species. But last year's, or the 2020 Santa Rita count, had only 50 species. So you can see there's a big difference the rain made, but it wasn't quite that. And these are the butterflies that were unusual. We had great southern white, 18 of these. The little asterisk next to it meant that was the first time it had ever been seen on the count. Great southern white, before last year, there had been about 20 individual sightings of great southern whites ever before. And we had 18 on the count. They were everywhere that year. Dog face, cloudless sulfur, all these Mexican yellow, all the sulfurs were just in huge number. Tail orange, unbelievable. Dainty sulfurs, even more unbelievable. Empress Lilias were even going gangbusters by then. White patch skipper was one that we never had on the count. We had 15 of those on mimosa. Yellow was another one. And the snout, of course, was huge. The total number of individuals was 134,000. If we had done the count a few weeks earlier when the snouts were really in high numbers, it would have been maybe 1 million. And the total individuals that we had the year before in 2020 was less than 1,000. Amazing. And this is the great southern white, the female. We've actually saw her laying eggs, but they're really a tropical butterfly. And we don't think, as mild as the winter was, that any of them made it through in any stage, because nobody's seen one this year. We get these huge puddle parties of sulfurs just all over the place. Sometimes other things like the checkered skipper. So let's go back to this last slide about this. And in the same slide, and go back down here, it says no plants, no herbivores. If you have no herbivores, what else don't you have? No predators, because there's nothing for them to eat. So they died off completely. And all of a sudden, these butterflies, it had 2 things going for it, especially the ones that could react quickly. You had plenty of food, copious food, and you had no predators to eat them. And so they were, lots and lots of percentages were making it through. I went to the Desert Museum later on in October, and all of a sudden I see these signs, which I'd never seen before. Stinging insects present. And I asked, what's this all about? And they said, Fred, just look around you. And up in like the palm trees, there were huge nests of paper wasps, like nobody had ever seen before. And people were actually getting stung at the Desert Museum. So the predators finally have started to make it back. And now the question is, what's going to happen this year? They're going to be too many predators. What interesting. Anyway, that's my story. Let's show you one of my favorite butterflies. It's an oak feeder. Is the Arizona sister. The underside is even more beautiful. Getting a little bit of sweat from my arm, and they really kind of on my nose, I guess. Okay, well, that's it.
That's an amazing end to your program.
You could say that.
Thank you so much. And I forgot at the beginning to ask people to put your questions into the chat. So please feel free to do that. And we'll take a few minutes to answer those. And actually, while people are doing that, I have a question, Fred.
Sure.
I've watched a lot of caterpillars eating my milkweed, and I've never seen them do the, I guess, the different instars where they shed their skins.
Yeah, I mean, they'll do it, monarchs, at least 4 times, yeah.
So do they eat the skin, or what happens to it that we don't see it there?
Well, I mean, it sheds its skin and all of a sudden it looks like a new butterfly. I mean, a new caterpillar, maybe. I mean, if
Mhm.
you only had one there, you could actually, you watch it one day, that one is twice as big as it was, or much bigger than it was. But, and a lot of them do get eaten. And I mean, some birds don't learn very well. And
Mhm.
there's other things I don't know, that might, we know that birds will not eat, monarchs, so they don't like it. The early experiments they did, they took the wings off and just gave bodies, and they would spit it out and immediately. There's a picture of the thing was done with a blue jay, and they fed the blue jay these things, and as long as they didn't have any wings, they would eat them. But if it was a monarch, then they'd spit it out. If it was anything else, that they'd eat it.
But what I meant was, does the caterpillar eat the skin? Or does it just
Mostly,
dries up and
mostly
goes
not.
away?
Mostly not. Sometimes caterpillars hatching will sometimes eat their egg shell, but
Uh-huh.
usually the skin, no. You usually see a little bit of it. If it just shed it, you might find it, but again, it might have fallen to the ground.
Yeah, I'll have to look. And then let's see, we had one, Paula has asked, do hummingbirds get the extra floral nectar from mesquites? She says, I see them at my mesquites and I always imagined they were eating insects, which they do, but could they also be getting those little drops of nectar?
I mean, it's possible that they recognized, that's, I mean, they're smart little birds. But I would think more likely it's looking for insects. That would be, and it would probably depend on the time of year. I mean, if they were coming and around there, because the insects are attracted to the nectar and even flowers, and you'll see hummingbirds picking off little tiny things.
Oh.
Baccharis is another thing; it attracts little insects. And you see the hummingbird in there is not so much getting the nectar from those plants. I mean, they like long tubular flowers that are red. I mean, that's where they get their nectar from generally. But there's no reason, like I said, they couldn't learn.
Mhm. And then if also, if you can see the in the chat, there are several, we'll give you a few minutes to look at those, several thank yous. Jillian, excellent presentation. Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. And then Paula has also asked if you can suggest reference books that aren't just field guides, but offer some interesting facts about a particular species.
I happen to have a book in my hand, and that I did this. It's hard to see, the lights reflecting. It's called Southeastern Arizona Butterflies, and it's Jim Brock and
Nice.
Rich Balowitz. They did a book 30 years ago, and Jim really is into the host plants and what they are. And so this, I mean, it's got pictures in it of all the species. The original one had black and white pictures of specimens. So these are live butterflies, and lots of life history information, what plants they use, when they're around. Yes, this is the greatest. I mean,
who's the publisher on that, and do you know if it's still in
print?
print?
It's a company that's here in Tucson called Wheatmark, and what they do is they help the design and stuff, and then they print to order, kind of a situation. However, both Amazon and Barnes and Noble have found enough interest in the book that they buy these things, the print to order in some quantity that they get the lowest price, and they're selling them online for whatever the $48 or something that the book sells for.
Okay.
So far it isn't in. I'm trying to see if I can get the Desert Museum to get some to use, because I think it makes sense. Yeah.
And then there's two other questions here, and then I think we're going to have to finish up. but it says, I think that some of the blues have a symbiotic relationship with ants where the larvae are raised inside the ants.
You mean inside the nest? It says,
I guess
Oh,
so.
yeah.
I
Doesn't
guess it's
actually
supposed to be the
raise the
ant's
nest,
nest.
yeah.
It says next. That's why I'm going, I don't think so. Inside the
Yeah,
ant's nest.
the-
Do
the-
blues in Arizona do this, or is it mainly tropical?
No, I mean, those ants, the ant you saw on the, will take at night, will take the larvae down into its nest.
Really?
There are some blues in the Eastern Hemisphere that actually prey on ant larvae. They eat them. And they somehow get pheromones that make the ants think they're other ants, and the ants again protect them from other things, but they'll slowly eat some of their larvae, some of the ant larvae. So it's, I mean, so many strategies and amazing different ways things do things
Yeah.
even here just locally. There was a question about cyanosis.
Yes.
There are several species, but the one that I'm thinking of is Fendler's cyanosis, and it grows from maybe up in the Catalinas. You can find it from Rose Canyon Lake up to 8,000-9,000 feet to Incinerator Ridge. And we have 4 species of butterflies that use it. An azure, the Naes metal mark, which is a really unusual bug, one of the dusky wings, and and an Arizona hair streak, which is a beautiful one. So, it's a great plant. And it's interesting because it grows in a lot of places. After the fire in 2003, the big Aspen fire, it opened up a lot of places, like Oracle Ridge. And so there's a lot more flowers, there's a lot more butterfly host plants, and there's a lot more cyanosis. And so Oracle Ridge is a wonderful place, or it was a wonderful place. It burned again in the Bighorn fire, and it'll probably be a while before it comes back. But butterflies in the long run like open areas for the most part, and so fire is over the long run good for them.
Well, thank you so much. This has just been a fascinating program, and we can look forward to, as we're getting into spring and summer, we're seeing more butterflies.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, I mean, and it can't be any worse than last year. So, I mean, the beginning of last year. I don't expect we'll have these monster waves of butterflies because the predators are back. They're finding stuff to eat. Yeah, so it'll be more balanced than it was last year. Okay.
Lynn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think we're pretty much done. There were several people who commented in the chat, Fred, to thank you for the presentation, Jillian and Ken Kinsley and Paula and several others. So really enjoyed it. It obviously was a topic that was of great interest, and you did a great job, and we really appreciate it. We're now ready for whatever happens in our next few months in terms of the butterflies.
Yep.
Well, thanks to all of you who joined us. We're glad to have had you here, and we will look forward to seeing you on May 12th for our next meeting, when we'll hear about Sarah Plummer Lemon.
Well, thank you, Fred.
And my cat's here to say goodbye to all of you. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.